Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is the most important session in the conference, right? For sure, yeah, exactly, yeah. We're so delighted for you to be here on dealing with this really vital challenge that affects everybody in the world. But what we want to do today with our esteemed panelists is really not have a litany of problems, but have a litany of solutions. That we all go out of here really pumped up and know things that we can actually do very pragmatically to bend the arc of the environmental challenges we're facing today and also address some of the social determinants of health. We've got some incredible people in the audience who are great experts, so we'll have a wonderful discussion amongst us at the end. But at first, what I'd like to do is introduce our incredible panel, and in the order that they'll be speaking. We have Dr. Wutrina Smith. Wutrina is the Associate Dean and Co-Director of the University of California Global Health Institute for Planetary Health at UC Davis. She's a veterinarian, but she wears many, many different hats, and if I was to go and actually talk about them, we'd be here for the next 10 minutes. But please speak to her after, because she's been an incredible innovator and leader in this space for a very, very long time. We have Fauna Foreman. Fauna is the founding director of the Center for Global Justice at UC San Diego, and Fauna is a political scientist. So remember earlier we were thinking, how do we get people of different disciplines on board? Fauna is an example of that, and she will probably, hopefully, share a little bit about why she got into this space as a political scientist. Dr. Catherine Machalaba is a longtime friend of CUGH. She's the chief scientist at the EcoHealth Alliance. And to know a little bit about Catherine, we contacted her, emailed her. She was supposed to be on actually a call. Sorry, I was supposed to be on a call, but she couldn't make it. So what would Catherine be doing that she couldn't make on an important call with CUGH? She's in West Africa saving a baby pangolin. This is a true story. She sends me a picture. Keith, I couldn't do this because, look, I'm saving this baby pangolin. That's the life of Catherine. It's an amazing story, and she's going to weave that into her discussion today, which is really important in terms of what the purpose of this is. And Federico Castillo, so who's got the money? Federico does. Professor Castillo is an environmental economist at UC Berkeley. So what you can see is what we've tried to do is pull together people, a veterinarian, political scientist, health economist in this space. So I'm going to just take a few, frame the issues a little bit. It's easy to get discouraged by the challenges we have before us, but I'm going to paint a little picture of opportunity. And the interesting thing is, while we have a triple environmental crisis, climate change crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and pollution, this is actually a nexus of opportunity. It's the climate change crisis we know. The biodiversity crisis, for reasons that elude some of us, has not received the attention it should have. But I would argue today that is an existential crisis equivalent to that of climate change. And the reason I say that is that the creatures that we have on this planet, the network of nature and biodiversity, is actually part of the life support system that supports our lives. If that goes, we go. And there's no easy way around that. So we're actually in the middle of a sixth extinction crisis right now. The last one that was equivalent to this was, anybody know? Meteor hits the Yucatan Peninsula, the dinosaurs die. But this is at our hands. The opportunity I'm going to share with you in a minute. The neglected foundation of development in that triple environmental crisis, because the drivers of those causes of the climate change, biodiversity, and pollution are us, it's our activities, it means we also have the power to change that. A really important way of doing that is to be able to protect the critical ecosystems that exist on the planet. Here's what happens. Those ecosystems are also harbingers of incredible biodiversity. They only represent a small percentage of the land mass of this planet, about 2.5%. But they're also something else. They're climate, they're carbon sinks. You protect those critical ecosystems, they not only can protect biodiversity, but you're also protecting carbon sinks. So instead of expensively trying to make some technological advancement, you can actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere to be able to bring it onto the planet. And we know we have to do two things. We not only have to reduce emissions, but we're actually also having to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I was listening to a discussion with Ambassador Kerry, who's the US Special Envoy for Climate Change, just a few days ago, actually, on NPR. And he sort of blithely said, yeah, the interviewer asked him, are things better now? He goes, yeah, you know, when we started this, we were going towards a 5 degrees centigrade increase in temperature, but now we're probably down to about 2.5. Well, the goal in Paris was what? 1.5, exactly, Dr. McCabe. So if 2.5 we cannot be satisfied with, we have to pull that down, although the consequences are incredible. So how do we do it and why do we do it? We've got some great speakers here who are going to talk about it. Because one, I'll leave you with this small point on the how to do it. If you can work with local communities to actually protect those critical ecosystems, you not only address those two environmental crises, but you're also able to generate funds sustainably from those areas that can be used to generate into the social determinants of health. In other words, it can sustainably generate funds that can go to pay for healthcare, education, and other social needs. We don't invest in that very much, but you're going to hear about how to do it. Finally, whatever we decide to do, first of all, they're political choices, right? Whether you choose to end subsidies for oil and gas, whether you choose to protect a particular site, whether you choose to have a 30% protection for your oceans, those are all political choices. If you choose to do that, though, you have to have the structures in your governments that are able to do that. You need people, you need the infrastructure, and you need the finances. So one thing we have to do, which we tend to neglect, is we have to be able to, we should be working with countries to support them, and those that do, to strengthen their ministries, not only in health and the environment, but in finance, in law, and in other areas. Because if you're able to protect that foundation in the public service, then governments can actually implement the research that you're generating that they ought to be doing. Anyway, I will stop there and just say that here's the opportunity. If we protect these critical ecosystems, you can actually improve the social determinants of health, address climate change, and reduce the biodiversity crisis. And you're going to hear some great opportunities of that now. Okay, I will, yep, and then get political. All right, thanks everybody. I'll turn it over to Dr. Smith.
Okay, I'll get us started with a few initial thoughts, and we've saved time during this session to have discussion amongst the audience and panelists. So please, if ideas come or questions come as you're listening to some of these initial paint the picture type presentations, jot them down. Please feel free to share them. We really want this to be something that is a conversation. So as Keith mentioned, I'm here really thinking through what are we doing in the space of planetary health? What is planetary health? And how might we all get involved if we think this is important as far as bending the curve and really finding a path forward which leads to a more sustainable future. So we're in California for CUGH this year. I want to take just a moment to reflect on one of the models that we've taken on here, which I think is useful. So the University of California has 10 campuses, and we're all different. UC Davis, where I'm based, is the only veterinary school, for example. So the UC Global Health Institute is based out of our UC Office of the President, and it works across all 10 campuses. And what I love about that is it means students and faculty can find each other for certain opportunities outside of your usual place. So we try and put forward opportunities for students to get experience during the summers, online courses that will be happening where you can enroll from any UC campus, and this is a way to share ideas. Right? We'll be able to talk about what's working and what's not in the triple environmental crisis, where we have climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss, and then where are we working in different parts of the world to try out things that might help improve the situation. So the UC Global Health Institute is a special model happening here in California. We're doing this internationally with the support of the U.S. Agency for International Development as well. They've sponsored over the past decade or so initiatives in support of global health security, And the one that I lead is called One Health Workforce Next Generation. As part of that, we've built a network of health professionals around the world, and they're also now able to bring in climate and health issues as part of our scope, which is very special given that the climate change issue is probably one of the existential threats to society over the coming decades. So what is planetary health? Why are we really thinking about this new term or newish term over the past 10 years or so? It still brings in the One Health approach that I hope everyone is familiar with. We want to be working collaboratively across different disciplines and sectors to address areas that are complex, right? I need to work with environmental economists and social scientists and other health professionals because I don't have all the answers. But maybe if we work together, we can come up with ideas that will be more integrated, more successful, and make sense for the communities as well as the policymakers if we do things right. So it's really a matter of scale. For many of us who were trained as health professionals, we thought about what's happening with the individual animal or person. How do I scale that up to their family or their community? Well, now we're going bigger, and we're saying, hey, we only have one planet. The environments that we share are also critical for the health of people and of the planet. And so if we can't find a way to have those in balance, we're going to have a problem. And that's where the climate change threat becomes very severe very soon. So when you hear us talk about planetary health, we're thinking about just scaling out. Recognize that there is a global level of health systems, and we want to think about water and air and some of those different components as really the life structures of our planet that we need in order to thrive. The social determinants of health, of course, and the Sustainable Development Goals, I would say as well, I would consider cross-cutting themes in everything we do, right? We are here to benefit communities, so we want to really think about how do we shift livelihoods responsibly? How do we make choices that make sense given the social determinants of health infrastructure? And so hopefully we can build that into what we're discussing today. So the power of people is immense. This is my favorite part of the job that we have, and some of you sitting in the audience are part of this network. That One Health Workforce Next Generation project, where we're working at universities, but then also with in-service professionals and with youth on training innovation for global health security, which started in the outbreak space, but has actually adapted and now can include climate and health issues. It's so powerful to be able to pick up the phone or send an email or reach out on WhatsApp to partners around the world at any time and say, hey, what's happening with you? What's going on with this adapting situation, and what can we do together to try and make it better? Trust is essential. We talked about that a lot in the previous session. Without trust, it won't work, right? So my rule of no toxic people on any of the projects that I run is very important to me. If you're not a team player and you're not collaborative, then great, go do something else. But really building this health professional network of people who want to work together and who trust and act responsibly has been a real key to success in this space. So it's a consortium of universities for global health conference, right? We're thinking about how can we be an effective consortium. And these AfroHoon and CUGH networks across 17 countries in Southeast Asia and Africa are the perfect example of how people working together can actually be linked to communities and linked to policymakers in very powerful ways. So we launched this phase of the project just before the pandemic in 2019. And we had our whole work plan set, everything we were going to do for global health security training in these 17 countries, and then COVID hit. And instead of folding, which a lot of projects did because there just wasn't time or resources to do the work they'd planned to do, we pivoted. And the teams in the regions across Africa and Southeast Asia were together with us here in the US on Zoom every day. And we were making plans for how do we put the local trainings and the local actions that can happen to work in the context of COVID-19. And so being able to share what's working and what's not was so important. Well, we're now really building in the climate and health curriculum in a similar way. How can we do this where we take successes in one place, share them with others, and then have them tailor that success to their own programs for training in these different areas? So over 50,000 people have been trained in that specific initiative as one example. And as we move to an online space, in addition to what traditionally would have been more of a face-to-face training environment, we developed a training platform called the One Health Workforce Academies, open to anyone around the world. You can see here over 90 countries have been presented. It's a place where we have online courses and case studies that relate to all sorts of different topics. Climate and health is an emerging area where we're starting to build that in more and more. So this is good for faculty. You can use these resources in your own teaching. You can assign your students to go watch the videos and then discuss what happened in those videos with those experts sharing their perspectives in your own community or in your own voice. It's also great for learners, and learners of all ages. We adapted it with a university audience in mind because no one's an expert, but actually a lot of our in-service professionals are taking it because they want to become more well-rounded and collaborative with areas that they're not an expert in. So I wasn't an expert in climate change, but I could learn a lot from the courses that are now going to be posted here on what's happening in that space that complement the traditional training that I already undertook. So I would invite anyone to please feel free to explore, to use it, reach out to me if I can be helpful in putting this to work in your own place. Hands-on learning, right? We can do a lot on Zoom and on the online space, but it's not a substitute for hands-on experiential learning. So another format we've done very successfully is field courses where you have a 2 to 4 week immersion experience where you bring around 30 people. We've usually done graduate students and early career professionals from many different countries. And that way you have place-based experiential learning. You use this One Health approach to talk about what does climate change look like in this community? What are they thinking about with regard to bottom-up or top-down approaches to making things better? What are their issues that the communities care about, and how are those being addressed or not? So this field course experiential format has been really fun and very powerful, and we've done this in a number of different countries. So this is a picture of my ranch, also a study site where we do a lot of work on climate change resilience. And that's the Dixie Fire. The orange you see is not the sunrise or the sunset, that's the fire. And so this is a place where we had set up longitudinal monitoring for wet meadow restoration as part of restoring healthy headwaters for the state of California, but fire burned about half. So now we've actually put into the research space and the training for the students chances to understand what's happening with wildfires. How are the communities and the environment changing in addition to what was going on with the local livelihoods? And that's been pretty important now that we have pre and post opportunities for research like this to come into play. That site is also where we're doing nature-based restoration. So the US federal government, the NRCS, put forward resources to be able to restore the headwater ecosystem so that the water that comes from the mountains in California will hopefully be enough and of high quality to feed everyone downstream. And so we've really looked at how do you put in very simple things. You can see a beaver dam analog in the bottom picture there, just woven willows through sticks. But it starts to slow the water down. So we used to have such cavernous areas that you could fit a school bus and not even know it was there. But the wet meadow restoration has raised the water level, it's brought the meadows back, the wildlife is coming back, the biodiversity is increasing. So there are places that we're trying to really use as just pilot points. And we're studying the carbon flux coming into the grasses as well as the wildlife and the human components of this. So it's an integrated approach to studying what we can do for climate resilience. This is the little reminder for me, and maybe our friend in the back can click the video so that you can see what happens after we do our research. So we do wildlife capture to understand what's happening. Miles O'Brien from PBS NewsHour called this the rodent rumble, because we knew that when the fire happened, the rodent numbers that lived in these meadow systems was knocked way down. We could study what was happening as the rodents returned and habituated in different parts of these ranch sites that hadn't been possible for a while. So we would do our capture, we'd do our science, and then we'd be sure to actually make sure they went back to their home environment and that everyone was happy. So there's a lot of research going on involving students in these places, which has been really important, I think, to inspire them to stay involved. And my last slide that I'll share is just a reminder for us to think about how we can each get involved. So the top-down approach to making change is going to involve policymakers typically, right? We're going to look at what are the rules and regulations that we can put in place that will put a structure there that the communities can work within to hopefully be able to improve the situation. So when I flew to Kenya a couple weeks ago and they said before I got off the plane, no plastic bags, right? That was a policy that had been put in place, trying to reduce pollution in that case. And so everyone within it then will respond. The opposite, and what I've been typically involved in, has been more of the grassroots or the bottom-up approach. And that's where we say, hey, let's work with the local universities or the local communities and figure out how we want to make this health situation better. I'm a zoonotic disease epidemiologist, so I work on diseases that move between animals and people. So we would meet with the communities and we talk about their health issues for themselves and their animals, and then we think about how do we move forward with integrated approaches to change. If we showed that something worked at that university or with those communities, then we could start to get the word out about what was working, and that would inspire the scale out across different programs. So the One Health University networks that I mentioned, AFRIHUN and CUGH, with all their country chapters, are doing that too. They are linked to the communities. They're talking about what's going on with their health issues, with their climate and pollution issues, and thinking through how do we share successes so that will inspire change in more places, and that may work its way up to policies in many different situations. So I'm going to stop there and just say that I hope we can all find personal and professional ways to act now. This is my little picture from a beach, a beautiful white sand beach where there's so much garbage that the turtles can't get from the beach to the ocean. And so there are local NGOs and activities happening to deal with the pollution, to try and deal with the biodiversity issues, and to really have ecotourism and education and training livelihoods as part of that so that it can be done in a long-term manner. Thanks very much.
Good morning. Thank you for the. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So what are the next slides that you have? You have Professor Foreman.
Yep, perfect. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. This is indeed such an important topic and a real challenge of our time, as we know. So I'm encouraged that the room is pretty full. It shows that there is an interest and a commitment in CUGH. And thank you so much again, Dr. Martin, for keeping this a really consistent theme, also bringing together the working group on planetary health, One Health, and environmental health. I think we're really seeing how important the global health community's role is in addressing this triple planetary crisis. Today, I will just briefly talk about community-based conservation and communication. I am not a community expert. I'm also not a communications expert, but really taking a One Health lens, we have learned some important lessons that I think for global health and the work that we're all doing, it's important to keep in mind. Probably nothing that you're not familiar with already, but that we can really think about the best practices and as a community find important solutions. The One Health approach, I think the terminology, it doesn't matter much to me. I don't think it matters much to those who are really working across disciplines, but the visual here I think is a little bit helpful. This One Health visual that the 4 intergovernmental agencies agreed on, sort of the guiding principle, this harmonized understanding of a One Health approach. I usually default to bringing in the environment sector, but I think for me it's been also very helpful to see the important role of communities here and inclusiveness, equity, access, and really rural communities on the peripheries or sometimes even within the protected areas that I'm working in and around. So keeping in mind really the role, also the priorities, and sometimes the trade-offs that they're really facing as they have their land even made to protected status. They may lose rights to that land. They may have a really important stewardship role. Sometimes there's a lot of direct conflict with really the drivers of biodiversity loss and also climate change, with logging and mining in those areas. So for me, it's really helpful to keep in mind these trade-offs and co-benefits when we think about communities and really the role of a One Health approach. I think Federico will talk more about ecosystem services, but of course they're very important for our health. They really underpin life on Earth. Ecosystem services, biodiversity, the components of healthy, intact ecosystems. As we lose those services, there are really fundamental impacts on our lives, on our economies, and on our health. So, we unfortunately are grappling with the more than 1/4 of deaths, of illness that's really linked to unhealthy environments. Unfortunately, we see that that's increasing with things like extreme flooding events, loss of really resilience as ecosystems are fundamentally degraded. There are some positive impacts with restoring ecosystems that has to be really done on a mass scale, but we have to always keep these in mind and make sure that others are aware of how valuable these are. Ideally, protecting these ecosystem services, protecting the biodiversity, the primary forest that's already in place, not then later having to deal with restoration, which of course is much more expensive. So I want to just address a few key themes that I think are really important to keep in mind. Certainly, we need to build and maintain awareness. This is something that we see about environmental awareness. Sometimes there's very low really awareness about the importance of our backyard, our ecosystems. And even for those who are really closely, their day-to-day dependencies, lives, food security, traditional medicine really tied to these ecosystems. But their awareness really about how important their role, can be sometimes limited, as we've seen. Also, probably even more important is the importance of building and maintaining trust. That has come up across the conference. It is so important. It is really important for these communities that are, I think, a little bit victim of a lot of different groups going in and working on protected areas, and then not always going back, not always keeping the promises that are made. And there's really this growing sense of frustration, and I think it's very fair in terms of the equity and really their role, in protecting the forest, protecting species, and really not always seeing the return on investment. So I think we have to be a little bit very intentional about the work that we're doing and making sure that it is a long-term engagement with these communities, because they are doing the hard work to keep those ecosystems intact. I think also about the health awareness piece, about reducing disease risk. This is a nice tool you can see on the screen, Living Safely with Bats. I'm sure at the conference, some partners were involved in developing that during the PREDICT project, but also the rollout of it and the upscaling of it too. It has had several different lives and expansions. But really going to communities and talking about the benefits of bats, ecosystem services. Bats provide very important ecosystem services. There are a lot of species of bats, so their roles are very different in each ecosystem, but consumption of mosquitoes, so helping to reduce vector-borne diseases, pollination, even their guano, playing a role in healthy soils. So this is very important, about when we conduct a research study, when we're looking at knowledge attitudes and practices, making sure that we're also giving the tools for people then to play a role in their ecosystem. You don't want to be going out and killing bats and really afraid. You want to have constructive tools to reduce your risk, but also safeguard bats and the ecosystem services they provide. There has been really, I think, very strong reception to that information, to that dialogue. You can see here some Liberian scientists who were in the community really sharing this book and engaging with the community and hearing how people are interacting with bats in their day-to-day lives. And of course, it varies by community. School children reacted in a different way. You can see the fuzzy bats. They really liked, being able to sort of see what a bat wing looks like up close and interact. So I think this was a really positive experience. The frustration that we heard was, you need to be going to a lot of different areas and we need to keep learning, and that's of course absolutely true. So finding a way to build in this biodiversity sensitive messaging and across really the health communication that we're doing. Want to just pivot a little bit to chimpanzees. We heard about the pangolin, but chimpanzees are also very important. They are one of our closest living relatives. They play a vital role in forests. So if we lose chimpanzees, we really do not have healthy forests. It's the same thing for elephants and many other species. We really need them in our ecosystems. They're also an umbrella species. So if we protect chimpanzees, we have a better chance of really protecting other species. Unfortunately, we see that there's been an 80% decline in the western chimpanzee, which is a subspecies of the chimpanzees in general. And this is from a lot of different causes, but primarily habitat destruction, poaching, and disease. So we're not doing well. You can see, what a healthy chimpanzee looks like, and then you can see these really terrible conditions that they're in. Not good for animal welfare, not good for ecosystems, and of course then a disease risk too for humans. So in terms of solutions, I think that these are really challenging issues. Anyone dealing with poaching knows that this is a really heartbreaking situation, and it's really prevalent, and there are a lot of different drivers, corruption being a really fundamental one, greed, and I think there are also some solutions where we see that things are working. There's a lot of ways to go, but just to feature the work of my friends Jenny and Jim Desmond, they have started Liberia Chimpanzee Rescue and Protection. They our conservation colleagues, they've worked a lot with Jane Goodall Institute and others in this field. They never had the intention to create a sanctuary. Unfortunately, once they came into Liberia and started working with partners there, including the Forestry Development Authority, they saw this was a really big impediment. There was no sanctuary for chimpanzees. So the government was not upholding the law because there was nowhere to put the chimpanzees. If they found, a pet, chimpanzee in the community, they would just leave it there because there was really no place for it to go. If you've taken care of chimpanzees, this is very complex, it's very expensive, they really require very specific care. So they did start a sanctuary, but then really in parallel, working on enhancing law enforcement, increasing awareness. I think that this is also really a livelihood opportunity too. So they have 60 employees working on many different aspects, including direct caregiving. A lot of the chimpanzees that come in are baby chimps, so they can't just be left to their own devices. It's like a human baby, and they really have to stay with care really 24/7 for several years to learn those skills to really be healthy. And they're really thinking about how this fits into the ecosystem too. So that they now have 102 chimpanzees. It's way too many. It really shows the scale of the poaching issue, because you can consider that for each baby chimpanzee that is actually confiscated, about 7 to 10 will probably die as a victim of the trade. Their siblings, their mom. So it's really heartbreaking, the scale of the issue. So they have developed a long-term community lease. This is a 450-acre site. They really see the long-term vision of how this can work with the community, how the community can directly be involved in this and benefit. So right now we're in phase 1, and phase 2 is habitat protection and a visitor education center. This is really important because this area it's a mangrove ecosystem. It's a proposed protected area, but that formal establishment of it was really lacking, partially because of resources. So trying to really get this formally protected for the future. This is a vital ecosystem, but also making sure that then the livelihood opportunities are built in for the local community. So tourism, food sourcing. Chimpanzees eat a lot of food, so you really have to have a lot of, a reliable food source. Also, for the community too, there are benefits of having locally grown food and those supply chains that are really reliable. Conservation monitoring, this is an important ecosystem. There's a lot to learn from it. We don't even know about all of the species that are there. We started doing some camera trapping. And then veterinary care. Unfortunately, there are no Liberian veterinarians. This is a really key gap when we think about workforce needs. So really building in a training and applied working setting. And then this is the envisioned One Health Conservation Center. I would like to really invite you all to send your students, to send your faculty here when developed. It's about 14 months out, but the vision is really to make it community-based conservation, local education, local training, local research, and international partnerships using a One Health approach. There's a lot of ethical considerations that have to come in. We really hope to learn from those in CUGH about how to get this right. Just briefly, I know I'm probably running very short on time, thinking about expanding the health workforce. So usually I think about the role of veterinarians. I know we have a lot of vets in the room, which is amazing. Also thinking about the ranger workforce, really those on the front lines of protected areas who are sometimes the only eyes and ears really about what's happening in the forest, including if illegal activities are happening like mining in a protected area, hunting. So we just concluded a training around the country in Liberia, working with the Forestry Development Authority, and they said we really want to apply a One Health approach in our day-to-day work. What to do if our rangers see sick animals, dead animals in the forest, what does that mean for public health, and then linking up better with other sectors and bringing that information about what they're seeing on the ground. This was an amazing opportunity. We did some One Health Ranger patrols in these protected areas, and then also had some community engagement sessions, which were very enlightening for me. So I want to just highlight a few quick examples from this. So the community forest model, I think it's very interesting. It's something that Liberia has really put into place when designating protected areas. So you can see here this really dark green area, Wanagizi, and then in Guinea, the Ziama forest. So this is an important corridor for biodiversity. And you really need to have that corridor to make sure that migratory species can move as they should. So we were working with colleagues in the Wanagizi forest. It's a proposed protected area, and as the perimeter there's a buffer zone and then a community forest. Communities are really the owners of that area, so it's ensuring that they have land that they can use as they prefer. Ideally, they will take a stewardship role and pursue livelihoods that are conservation compatible. There are a lot of really key threats to biodiversity still happening, though, and as those communities, say, lose those forests, there's a risk that they might go closer to the buffer zones and then into the interior forest that is ideally protected. You can see the pangolin there. It's not the baby pangolin. It's a different pangolin that was confiscated in that landscape by the rangers. They're really seeing this very often in their day-to-day work and having to contend with the needs of the communities and also the challenges for biodiversity. What's very important here is, when we did our One Health Ranger patrol, we saw some direct threats to health of that community. Thank you. 1 minute left. Okay. So we were meeting with the town chief there. They play a very important role as an ambassador. They also have a very good rapport with the rangers. So that's an entry point for community-based conservation, also for health. It was a dry season, so it's a little bit hard to see, but that's a creek there, and that's where they were filling their water bottles and also drinking palm wine. This was about 11 a.m. in the morning. These were the options they had. They didn't have working pumps, unfortunately, so they had been installed and then they had really spoiled, and so they had no fresh access to clean water. I think this is a real failure. When we think about working with communities and community forests and that model, we need to build in a community development fund, make sure that communities really have access either to the resources, financial resources, but also knowledge resource, what to do if your pumps no longer work, and I think it's actually a really easy fix, maybe just a few dollars, but it requires, sourcing of materials to be able to fix it. So Dr. Martin said about we need effective public institutions, but we also need effective working together across those institutions. To me, this was really an eye-opener. I'll just close with this, that, we're really trying to help the ranger workforce play a role in these county One Health platforms. So bringing a One Health lens to the county level and below, but we need to create those bridges there so that when the rangers see this, they don't have to decide, do I use my money out of my own pocket, or can they go to Public Works and say, we need some help to do this. The same thing with WASH expertise. So right now those links are not in place. I think it's a real opportunity for global health and all of us to try to link up. Don't forget about rangers in your work. And I want to thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Catherine. That was fantastic. And for those of you, I want to point out Dr. Andrew McCabe and Dr. Ted Mishimas from the Academic Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges. They've done amazing presentations here on training veterinarians, as Catherine mentioned, the gap of vet techs. And Dr. Colmar, who's here from Vet Agro Sup in Lyon, France. They are the oldest veterinary school in the world, but they have a really innovative program training vet and vet techs with the University of Dakar in Senegal. So if you want to know more, speak to Cedric, speak to Dr. McCabe, and speak to Ted Mishima. Thanks. Dr. Foreman.
Wonderful. Well, I am absolutely honored to be here with you today to talk about the work that we're doing in the UC San Diego Center on Global Justice on human migration and ecosystem management in the US-Mexico border region. So everyone tends to see migration in this part of the world, northward movement, as a function of violence and poverty, and of course this is true, but climate change is a threat multiplier. It makes poverty and food insecurity worse, aggravates violence, and ultimately compounds the reason why people are leaving their homes. In a recent UNHCR survey, 74% of arriving migrants at the Tijuana-San Diego border, where I live and work, identify agricultural instability as a central factor in their decision to walk north. Now, a couple of preliminary geopolitical comments before I dive into the work. First, international agencies do not recognize these people as refugees, seeing them instead as economic migrants who are pulled toward a better life rather than pushed by catastrophe. So they're not entitled to asylum or international refugee protection under the Geneva Convention. This will need to change, as climate change is projected by mid-century to displace millions or as many as 1 billion people who depend on the land and the sea for their livelihoods. Second, in an era of accelerating climate disruption, there is deepening contention between the conservation community on the one hand and the human migration community on the other. This is an infographic that we created recently for the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, to illustrate global hotspots, zones where these agendas are clashing in profound ways. Obviously, the conservation community emphasizing protection of ecosystems, wildlife habitats, endangered species, often advocating strict measures to safeguard biodiversity. The human migration community, on the other hand, naturally centers human well-being and the rights of migrants, safe resettlement, social integration, and so on. So the clash of these agendas is often quite intense. And our border region is an example of such a site, an epicenter of accelerating global migration and also a hotspot of biodiversity loss. Finding common ground, very literally common ground for nature and people, is a priority for us in the Center on Global Justice. And I'd like to just give a glimpse of the work that we're doing. So the center is a team of social scientists, political scientists like me, urban designers, architects, environmental and public health researchers and practitioners, engineers, cultural producers, and artists. To carry out our work, we've developed a network of sanctuary spaces on both sides of the border wall called the UCSD Community Stations. Here, we collaborate with border communities on long-term research, education, environmental stewardship, civic and cultural activity, and urban development, including building public space and housing projects, including now the largest refugee sanctuary in the US-Mexico border region. Together, we build spaces of dignity and sanctuary in the city's periphery. Each community station is funded, built, programmed, maintained collaboratively between our campus and a local community agency. We're also committed to curating artistic and cultural interventions to publicly and politically represent the challenges our community partners face. And I'll show you some examples of that at the end of my talk. Now, a word about our core commitment, sort of echoing some of Catherine's themes. We are attuned to power dynamics when universities arrive in communities and are critical of both extractive research methods and humanitarian problem-solving missions. Academic culture is filled with vertical assumptions that we know more, that we are trained to solve the world's problems, if only they'll listen to us. Instead, we are committed to horizontal practices of co-production, engaging communities as partners with knowledge and agency, Everybody collaborates, everybody learns, and we do things together in the border region that no one could possibly do alone. Institutions with power too often take for granted the resources that communities invest when they partner with us: time, space, social capital, labor, knowledge. And as a matter of labor equity and epistemic justice, these contributions need to be validated and compensated. Our funders get that, and they support it. Relatedly, we're committed to learning from the bottom up. Too often, sites of poverty are denigrated as ugly, criminal, to be neglected, avoided, cleaned up, cleared. But we observe intensely active, creative urban agents who model inclusive and collaborative ways of inhabiting the city. We believe that academic researchers can learn and help to channel this bottom-up knowledge upward to influence more responsive and intelligent policymaking and resource allocation. So the academic researcher as a mediator or facilitator of bottom-up and top-down. Okay, so we have 4 community stations in operation, 2 in San Diego, 2 in Tijuana. I'll briefly share one in Tijuana, focused on climate migration and ecosystem restoration. Okay, let me set the scene. Tens of thousands of Central American migrants have found refuge in the informal settlements at the periphery of Tijuana. We work in the Laureles Canyon on the western periphery of the city, immediately adjacent to the border wall and home to 100,000 people. This aerial video, there's our site. So this aerial video, begin it, shows Laureles Canyon and the precarious informal settlements that have sprawled on its slopes. This site sits just 30 minutes from our American University campus and demonstrates the dramatic proximity of wealth and extreme poverty in our region. Laureles is impacted by dump sites, drastic erosion, flooding, and landslides, exacerbated by the dramatic precipitation fluctuations of climate change and the informal building practices of arriving migrants. Laureles lacks water and waste management, so much of the trash and tons of sediment is siphoned northward through sewage drains carved into the border wall by U.S. Homeland Security. It all ends up on the U.S. side in a protected estuary, a haven of biodiversity. It's a hot mess and illustrates the conflict between human and natural systems, migration and land use, as well as the profound lack of collaboration between the U.S. and Mexico to address these shared challenges. Enter UC San Diego. We've assembled a binational coalition of nonprofits and universities, state, municipal, and tribal agencies to identify and bundle unsquatted parcels in the settlement that are still able to be rescued environmentally. The Cross-Border Commons, as we like to call it, is a binational archipelago of conservancy that links the informal settlement in Mexico with the U.S. estuary, forming a continuous eco-social envelope that transgresses the wall, protecting the environmental systems shared by both sides. It's important to say we've learned a lot about indigenous land stewardship in this project, and you can see this in the drawings. Our UCSD Alacran community station, one of the 4, is located in one of these islands in the most precarious and polluted sub-basin of this canyon. It is a partnership with Embajadores de Jesus, a religious organization that built a refugee camp here for hundreds and over time thousands of Haitian and Central American refugees navigating unjust asylum processes in the United States and Mexico. Several years, we joined forces with them to increase their housing capacity. The site now houses 1,800 people and has become the largest refugee sanctuary in the entire U.S.-Mexico border region. Portions of a new housing project, Santuario Frontera, here on the top left, just came online, opened a few months ago, and will house ultimately an additional 2,500 people through a combination of dormitory spaces and family units for women and children. The project was profiled in the New York Times last year for its unconventional economic model focused on longer-term habitation, social inclusion, ecological restoration, and generating jobs. There's a lot to say here, no time, But the site includes spaces for vocational training, fabrication, small-scale economic development, including a resident-owned construction cooperative that is actually building the site. That's where the paid labor is and will stay operational for future construction and ecological restoration projects after this project is completed. So we see this as a translatable model of collaboration between a public university, a faith-based organization, and a multinational factory in Tijuana who is subsidizing the parts. By the way, this is little Amal, the Syrian, the puppet of the Syrian refugee girl that walked across the world, and we organized a visit of Amal to the children at the Alacran station. So with so much momentum underway, we are building the site into a full-on sanctuary neighborhood with social services, a hydroponics farm, an industrial kitchen, and even more housing coming online in 2025. This spring, we're launching a health clinic, a collaboration with the UCSD School of Medicine and UABC's School of Medicine in Baja. And just a few months ago, the state of Baja helped to open an elementary and middle school at the site, huge victory, and the municipality is currently paving the road into the site, a dirt road that gets washed away with every rain event. Okay, that's the project. There's so much more to say about the community stations and what we do in these spaces, but I'd like to close on a cultural note with a cultural provocation about the about what it means to do eco-social collaboration in a contested, border zone. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is build a cross-border citizenship culture, a sense of belonging that is defined not by the nation state or the documents that you carry in your pocket, but by the shared interests and aspirations among people who inhabit a disrupted civic space. That's how we see it. Despite the wall and the ugly political rhetoric designed to divide us, we are a binational ecology of flows and circulations, and our future in this region is intertwined. Air, water, waste, health, culture, money, hope, love, justice. These things do not stop at border walls. Borders are unrelentingly porous things, despite what the politicians are trying to do with them. In the community stations, we curate unwalling experiments that dissolve the wall, right, using visual tools like these diagrams and radical maps to reimagine eco-social interdependence and cooperation. Several years ago, we curated a cross-border public action through one of the sewage drains that the U.S. had carved into the border wall between Laureles Canyon and the Tijuana River estuary. We negotiated a permit with Homeland Security to transform the drain into an official port of entry going southbound for 24 hours. They agreed. They were disarmed by our self-representation as just artists. As long as Mexican immigration officials were waiting on the other side of the border to stamp our passports. Our convoy, you can start it, was comprised of 300 local activists from both municipalities, border activists from around the world, and as we moved together southbound under the wall, here you see we're about to enter, we witnessed slum wastewater and plastics flowing northward toward the estuary beneath our feet. This strange crossing, right, visualized the conflicts and interdependencies of our border region. The great takeaway for everyone here was that protecting the vulnerable U.S. estuary, protecting biodiversity, demands shared investment in the informal Mexican settlement. I have one more minute. But in reality, the conflicts that we experience locally between nation and nature are reproduced again and again along the entire trajectory of the continental border between the United States and Mexico. These aerial photos document precise moments when the jurisdictional line collides with natural systems, powerfully illustrating what dumb sovereignty looks like when it hits the ground in a complex bioregion. The last project is our Mexus project, which reimagines the continental border zone without the line. Mexus dissolves the border into a bioregion whose shape is defined by the 8 binational watershed systems that are bisected by the wall. Mexus also exposes other systems and flows across this bioregional territory: tribal nations, protected lands, croplands, urban crossings, many more informal ones, 15 million people, and more. Ultimately, Mexus counters America's wall-building fantasies and cultivates more expansive eco-social imaginaries of belonging and cooperation beyond the nation state. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Foreman, and thank you for fighting against the scapegoating of migrants. There, but for the grace of God, we all go, right? Just by an act of birth.
Thank you. Once again, I want to thank Keith and the other members of the panel who invited me to have this conversation with you. I'm Federico Castillo. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the University of California, Berkeley. I am Deputy Director of Planetary Health and co-lead for Latinx and Environment, which is an initiative that we have for undergraduate students at the University of California, Berkeley, to do research on environmental issues. As I said, I'm an economist, so I'm going to talk a little bit about markets, biodiversity, and ecosystems. So next, please, next slide. Oh, no, I move it. This one here. You got it. Thank you very much. So one of the big issues with ecosystems is that they provide a series of services which have been discussed here by the panelists prior to me talking with you. But the issue with these services is that sometimes we are either not aware of the services or they are not incorporated into our decision-making process. For example, water quality and quantity provided by ecosystems is not reflected on our water tariffs, for example. The water tariffs might reflect the cost of the canals and the pumping and the cleaning and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but not necessarily the cost of keeping the source of water maintained in a way that we get that clean water precisely. So when we connect individuals, beneficiaries of those benefits generated by the ecosystems, with the ecosystems and the providers and those who run those ecosystems, we are more likely to have an optimal use of the resource than not. If we ignore these benefits, chances are we're going to overexploit the resource associated with those ecosystems. This has direct impacts on biodiversity levels, for example, or biodiversity, the diversity of species, and so on and so forth. So to be clear, there is a difference between the private cost and the social cost of something. If I make a deal with one of you, I buy your, I don't know, your iPad, a used iPad or something, that's a deal that you and I do. But if I make a deal with you to buy this iPad, and then I take it to get my Spotify with a speaker very loud, then there is a social cost to this because other people will be impacted. And this social cost is not reflected on the fact that I bought that iPad from you. The price of the iPad did not reflect that. And so that's exactly what happens to ecosystems as well. As again, ecosystems provide a series of services. These have been clearly identified. They are part of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment reports that we have seen. And these reports have concluded that these ecosystems are, that 60% of the world ecosystems are exploited in an inefficient way, unsustainable ways, and that the issue is cool markets, connecting people that provide these services and manage the ecosystems to the beneficiaries, resulting improvements. The answer from a theoretical perspective is yes, and the answer from a practical perspective, as projects around the world shown, is that indeed that is the case. That we can indeed manage our ecosystems in a more socially efficient way when we connect people who have what we call a skin in the game. So let us suppose that we have this ecosystem here. This is just a picture that I took from Omar Romero Hernandez and I are preparing a paper on payments for ecosystem service, a colleague of mine from the Haas School of Business. This is actually a picture from a real payment for ecosystem services in Oregon, but I will not discuss that at this point in time. I would just say that if we are able to connect folks through payments for ecosystem schemes, that ecosystem, which is tree and water and all the salmon runs and all the things that go associated with this, will be managed in a more efficient way than if we were not connecting these two representative individuals of society there. I'm going to give you an example of the Kenya Water Fund, which is a case study that we're looking into. It's not a project that I'm directly involved. We interviewed the folks who manage or who put this program together, the Nature Conservancy and other locals, local stakeholders and community-based organizations. So what you see here is at the bottom right of that is a city, Nairobi, right, in Kenya. And then what you see on the top left at the corner is forest and water and things, living things, rocks, not living things, and anything that goes into an ecosystem. The problem here was that the folks on the bottom right corner in the city have consumed water, a lot of it. There are also private sector. There is a Coca-Cola plant, for example. There is an energy generator. There is a dam, and so on and so forth. What people do on the top right here, meaning what the people who own the resources, the forests and so on and so forth, or the communities upstream, what they do impacts the quality of water of the folks downstream. And the cost associated with erosion control, for example, was huge. The dam was suffering from silting processes. These things have to be fixed every year. They cost money. The silting process results in the dam not generating as much energy as it is supposed to generate. And the folks, others, not just the dam, but others, were having to install filtration systems and so on and so forth for them to be able to produce the products that they produce. So the idea was then, how can we change behavior, which is the key to payment for ecosystem services? What is the incentive? What does it take for the folks upstream to change their behavior in a way that the folks downstream do not have to incur the costs associated with the unsustainable management of the resources? And the answer is a payment. You pay them to change behavior, to do something differently. And that's exactly what the Kenya Water Fund project does. It brings together, as I said earlier, people who otherwise wouldn't be. It creates a market that wasn't there. And that's the key here. Payments for ecosystem services create markets that otherwise wouldn't be there or are not there present. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of meetings. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of upfront cost to set up these systems, particularly at the level of the Kenya Water Fund project. But the results have been fairly good, I would say. 80 kilometers, I'm not going to mention all these bullets here, but 80 kilometers of riverine vegetation has been restored. There has been a 15% decrease in sedimentation with respect to the baseline, meaning for respect to when the project started. 8,500 farmers have received technical assistance to gain Rainforest Alliance certification. What that means is that these 8,500 farmers are basically becoming organic farmers, adding value to the market, selling at a higher price. The margins, farming margins are extremely low, by the way, regardless of whether you are an organic farmer or not. But nevertheless, the price received is higher. And over 19,000 farmers are engaging in soil and water management methods that reduce the cost for the folks downstream in terms of what they do, whether you are generating electricity or not. So as you can see, this payment for ecosystem services is fairly successful. The problem here, of course, is that it takes about $1 million to finance activities in the watershed. And at this point in time, the project, as of last year, was collecting about $600,000 only through fees and regulatory fees that go into making the payments. So there is a significant deficit that at this point in time is being funded by the international community, and that is financially not sustainable to the degree that the local operation cannot finance itself. But there is no reason to believe that improvements can be made. And by the way, this is a completely normal outcome. A lot of the ecosystem services provided by ecosystems are of global nature. That means that people in Sweden or in California is benefiting from something that somebody's doing in Costa Rica, Honduras, or Kenya. And so we don't have a way to capture these things other than through donations and income transfers to UN, UNDP, and other research institutions, which are, I will argue, a little bit inefficient. So that's one example of payment for ecosystem services. In terms of biodiversity and markets, again, environmental economics or economists can make the case for portfolio diversification when it comes down to the food supply. And I took this picture in Oaxaca, Mexico, while doing research. And what you see there is, on the first instance, there is I forgot what the vegetable is, but it's a market, it's a cash crop. And second level, you see corn, that's the light green. Then you see cattle in between, immediately after corn. And then you see what you kind of see, but I was there, believe me, is coffee. Is coffee on the edge of the right-hand side corner, top corner of the picture. What's important here is that in Oaxaca, Mexico, there are very little nutritional problems as community. This is in the Sierra Norte. There's very little nutritional problems there because these communities diversify agricultural production. It enhances biodiversity. It results in biodiversity being sort of maintained to a degree. And at the same time, these are two cash crops, while there are also subsisting crops, which is corn here. So for those of you who have been in Oaxaca or know Oaxaca, in the Sierra Norte at least, there is no private land. All land is community owned. And so when I say markets, I don't mean necessarily a market that is between individuals or private entities only, as we know them mostly here, but communities can create markets, food markets and production markets that are perfectly compatible with community making decision making. These two photos are I took in Honduras. What you see on the right is your typical coffee production. In the Yoro department in Honduras, I took that photo in 2016. Should say 2018, I think, actually. But the photo on the right is a monocrop production system. It produces a ton of coffee. And coffee is a cash crop that is exported. That's okay. The photo on the left, though, uses a very different production system. As you can see, there is many different types of plants and vegetation there in that photo. That photo uses what it can be, or what is something close to, an agroecological production system. And agroecological production systems also favor biodiversity conservation. They are compatible with ecosystem conservation. For example, you see, you cannot see, but the soil on the photo of the right is bare. A lot of fertilizer is, has an input, is used a lot. The one on the left, there is a lot of vegetation that is being used as cover for the soil to maintain humidity during after the rain, and also that serves as natural fertilizer. So all this to say that different production systems favor biodiversity, favor, by the way, the coffee on the left was organic coffee as well. So they favor production systems that, again, enhance biodiversity and produce good cash income through markets. In California, other than my feet and my boots there, what you have on that photo is, they're, again, contrasting photos. On the left, you have a farmer that is an organic farmer that is producing strawberries. But by the way, these are farmers of color. I interview and work with farmers of colors in the Salinas Valley. And what you see right in the middle is edible flowers. Now you will think, why does it matter? Well, because this production system favors soil conservation. By definition, this person does not apply fertilizers that are oil, petroleum-based. And so producing edible flowers give the farmer a extra cash income in that very small space, and also helps him with doing cover cropping, and in general, again, this is compatible with some conservation decisions, as opposed to the picture on the right, where they are harvesting lettuce, and if that packaging and harvesting machine was not there, all you will see is lettuce, but nothing else. These are monocrop production system, classic of the Central Valley, California, and these are not definitely biodiversity compatible. Now, just to be clear here, I'm not saying that we have to move 100% to agroecology or to organic production, but I'm saying definitely that we do very little research on the socioeconomic impacts of these systems. Why do I bring farm workers and food security and farm worker well-being here? And I'll have a couple of slides. Thank you to go. Thank you, Keith. Farm workers in California, North Carolina, all over the United States are seen as really almost a commodity. We think very little about the well-being. I know people in this room do think about the well-being of farm workers, but we think very little of them when we're eating at the table. And so all this to say that a healthy labor force is required to move to agroecological production systems, and a labor force that is that lacks food, as this data that I collected just this past 4 months ago shows, is not a labor force that is ready to withstand the rigorous work that we need for the impacts of climate change on the agricultural sector. So you can see there, for example, we did this is a USDA-approved panel, food security panel that we use in our survey. From May to today, that was July 2024, were there instances where you wanted to eat but did not have food? 25% of farm workers responded yes. This is a 422 farm worker sample in the Central Valley. All I'm saying is that our farm workers not only face food insecurity, this is not conducive to systems that promote biodiversity. What you see here, and this is my last slide, is what we call the triple threat that our farm workers face. So not only do they face heat waves and COVID and other things, the two graphs on the left show pesticide use in the state of California. As expected, the pesticide use is heavy, is red in the Central Valley and Imperial Valley, close to where some of our colleagues are doing their work. And what you see on the right is the temperature, average temperature, yearly temperature in California in the same area. The number, the highest temperatures reported in California coincide almost perfectly with the areas where pesticide use is heavy in California. So our farm workers are facing exposure to pesticides, exposure to heat waves, exposure to institutional and structural discrimination, and then, of course, food insecurity. This is not conducive to agriculture contributing to biodiversity or to contributing to a sustainable food supply chain. And I want to thank you for the time, Kit, and thanks.
Thank you so much, Federico, and thank you for bringing up the plight of farm workers and some of the egregious abuses, including child labor that exists in some communities. So thank you for doing that. So this is your turn. So please, if you go up in front of the mic, we'll take a couple of questions each. Please pose them to if you can pose your question under a minute, and then to the person that you want to pose the question to, and we will move forward. Quentin, please.
Yeah. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was very glad that Federico, the last speaker, brought up the question of pesticide use. And I raise this because I've very recently been involved in Africa with big dilemma about pesticide use, and I think, Keith, you know that I'm involved with the new medical schools in Africa, a consortium of new sub-Saharan African medical schools, and Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company that bought out one of the companies that that produces organophosphates, decided to fund a conference very generously. And that led to a big spat that, oh no, they are producing organophosphates in Africa and we shouldn't accept funding from them. The obverse side of that argument is that CropLife is another group. I don't know if you know about CropLife in Africa. It's a group that looks into the production of crops with use of pesticides and organic kind of farming at the same time. So the argument goes like this, that were organophosphates dumped from Europe into Africa because there was a good market, a willing market, or is the side that Africa actually has such a burden of insects and pests that they actually cannot do without the pesticides? But what we did in the end was to bring in the president of the American Society for Toxicology, came along to the meeting, and so the whole thrust of the meeting was to develop regulated use of pesticides and create toxicology programs within the new medical schools that included snake bite and the intelligent use of pesticides. So my question to you is, could you elaborate a little bit on, I didn't get a sense of whether you have a negative view of the pesticides in California, or whether you see them as essential, and if they are essential, how are you approaching it in a kind of whatever intelligent, ethical, regulated kind of manner?
Thanks. We'll take a couple of questions if we could. So if everybody's brief, then we'll get through your questions, and the panelists will have a chance to respond. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentations. My question is for Watrina specifically. So I wanted to quickly ask about any expansions that you may have for the One Health networks that you mentioned for MENA, like the AfroHun or the Southeast Asia one. So a lot of MENA countries currently are starting to work within the One Health framework, but they still need a lot of support in that area. So I wanted to ask you or other panelists, of course, if you have some activities planned or some activities that are happening at the moment within MENA. Thank you.
Thanks. So we'll go to the first question on pesticides. Do we need them or not? And then Watrina, that's yours.
You want me to? Yes. Thank you. Yeah. I'm not sure if I will say that I'm against or for. I think we need to adjust our knowledge base about pest control bigly, as somebody would say. And the reason that I say this is because production in the tropics is very different than production in a place like California. In the tropics, you have humidity, you have a lot of different kind of critters and other things that attack the crops, and yet we use pesticides developed somewhere else to attack these crops. And so the knowledge base is not there. The other thing that I am going to point out is that, no, I do prefer less pesticides for sure, or it would be ideal, zero pesticides. But I'm going to point out to one fact. As you know, the University of California, some of you might know, is a land-grant, well, there are 3 campuses in the University of California that are land-grant universities. We have a big agricultural and natural resource unit, and our farm advisors, by far, are not trained on agroecological systems. They know about it, but there are very few who are hired specifically to deal with that kind of production system. And so when they provide advice to farmers about how to deal with pests or seed selections and all the soil, the advice does not reflect the need to move away from this. So I think this was pointed out to me a couple years ago in terms of hiring individuals. So I think we need to move away from thinking that pesticides are the solution to a pest problem, and we need to think about other things like biological control, which has been around for a long time. ANCR has a lot of biological control. It's just not the norm, and it should be the norm rather than the fact. So we need to move away from pesticides. We need to start thinking differently in terms of pest pest control and agricultural production to do that.
Thanks, Federico. I can briefly answer the question about expanding access to educational resources and training resources. So it's a great question. The formation of these One Health University networks in different global regions was supported by the U.S. Agency for International Development. Very insightful, long-term funding has been wonderful. Everything that we've created is open to anyone. So I would love to see faculty and students and stakeholders taking up the courses and the case studies we've created and putting them to use and adapting them for your own purposes. That would be wonderful. I've also thought it was promising that in the more recent USAID new NOFOs, the Notice of Funding Opportunities that are coming out, they're once again listing Latin America and the Middle East and North Africa as eligible. So that's important because as different funding sources are willing to put resources towards wanting to be active in this training space for global health security or climate and health issues, then we're able to take what we've already created and really work closely with the local university partners and groups to do that more effectively. So please do stay in touch, use what we have already, but also look into what the new funding calls might be, and we can always talk about how you might want to adapt them further for your local uses or how we can do that as an expansion of Afrohoon and Siahoon as an example. So lots more to come on that, I think.
Great. Thank you. Please, we'll take these two questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all four presentations were really uplifting and amazing work that you all are doing or involved with in the context of a conference that is, pretty heavy with difficult and sad news. This was kind of uplifting, so thank you. My question is for Fauna. This is amazing what's happening at the border. I had no idea that UC San Diego was involved in such a cool project. Is this changing the dynamics of migration given how relatively hostile the Texas border or other borders are? Like our migrant groups learning that there's more resources in other parts of the border? Thank you.
Please, thank you.
Thank you. It is with pleasure to have attended this presentation. But myself, I am a lecturer at university, clinical psychology. This means mental health. During the presentation by the first presenter, I have not seen mental health anywhere in her presentation. The World Health Organization says there is no health without mental health. And as professional and lecturer in clinical psychology, we say about global health now, global mental health. My question is to know how the presenter can include global mental health inside global health. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think the first one's for Fauna and the next for Wutrina.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And this is the struggle we face every day. If only we were getting at the drivers of this, if only we could do more. Being regional and experiencing this in our own neighborhood, we feel an obligation as a public university to do what we can to support, local needs and challenges. But we do have a consortium of university partners across the entire U.S.-Mexico border region working very closely, to understand different practices and different interventions and learning from one another. I think the biggest impact we're trying to have is through our policy advocacy. So learning what we're learning from the ground and carrying it to people who are actually making decisions that can have bigger impact. So we're working very locally every day, but then the aspiration is to figure out how to move the needle in public perceptions as well as public policy. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Really recognizing the importance of making sure mental health issues are represented within the global health scope that many people are working on. We need more. There is a little bit woven into these projects that I've mentioned, and there's a big interest in doing more of that. So I think that's going to be an important area of growth. It was being discussed in one of the sessions earlier today, more formally, how to build a structure in for the mental health component of disaster response or different pieces that go along with development, and really thinking about how we can do that better. I know for myself as a veterinarian, mental health issues and suicide and many really kind of pieces that drive home the mental health issues very quickly are way too prevalent. And I know that's happening in many, many places in their own way amongst very challenging circumstances. So I would agree with you. We need it. It is part of global health, and we could do better on really being able to formalize the courses or the training opportunities around that to recognize the challenge and to come up with solutions that make sense in that local context. So thank you.
Well, just if you could come down after and ask your question to whomever, that would be fantastic because we're run out of time. But just to, if I can say, the interesting, as a value proposition to, as Fauna mentioned, moving the needle forward and bridging the gap between research, policy to implementation, a value proposition to policymakers is that, as you probably know, time spent in nature has a powerful impact upon depression and anxiety. But not only in that, broader impacts upon non-communicable diseases. So there's a huge value proposition. And in my province in British Columbia in Canada, where I'm from, as a physician, we can prescribe time spent, we can prescribe a parks pass. Mm-hmm. It's just incredible, because then it makes it free and accessible so people can encourage to spend time in nature. But listen, I wanted to really thank our incredible panel today, Dr. Wutrina Smith, Wutrina, Fauna, Catherine, and Frederico. Really a big hand for our great panelists. And if you have any questions, you had a question, please come up and ask whomever you wanted to. I'm sure they'll stick around for a bit. Thank you again for being here, everyone.